Thank you again, everybody, for joining. I'm really excited to see you all here. This is our first Ask the Expert event that we're hosting on the community, hopefully a monthly cadence, but this first one is for XIQ, ExtremeCloud IQ. So thank you again for joining, and if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to put them in chat. We'll be taking pre-submitted questions, and then I'll be going through any live questions that are submitted. Today, we're joined by Chris Sabo, who is a senior level 3 technician support for XIQ, and Keith Cotterman, who is a solution architect also for XIQ. So they're going to help me answer any questions you guys have about XIQ through the presentation. To start with, Chris Sabo is going to give us a little bit of information on RF, radio frequency troubleshooting settings to help you get the best speeds out of your devices using XIQ. And then we'll go into some of the pre-submitted questions. So thank you, everybody, and I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Sam. Hello, everyone. My name's Chris. I just wanted to go over just a couple basic points on how I would personally attack an RF issue, especially from being in a remote position. It's sometimes difficult to capture all these issues and troubleshoot the network and get it to a usable point while being remote. In my opinion, some of the top issues are, roaming, performance, sticky clients when you're trying to walk a campus, things like that. In my opinion, it's easier to troubleshoot a lack of coverage than it is to troubleshoot a bunch of APs at high broadcast powers that are adjacent to each other. We're going to come into situations with just co-channel interference, hidden node situations where we have a client connected to an AP that's farther away, and just because the signal from the AP is able to reach the client doesn't mean that the conversation is going to successfully happen the opposite way. As far as radio profile settings go, I would stick to the absolute basics, even regardless of the environment. Radio load balancing, all these settings sound like a very good idea, and they do have they have their appropriate use case scenarios, but 9 times out of 10, if we just start with a basic platform, basic radio profiles, that'll set you off to it'll set you up for success in the end. A lot less headaches too. Couple other things I wanted to speak about was the IQ VA, which is the virtual ExtremeCloud IQ platform currently offered that you can deploy in VMware. In the help file, you'll see that there's a section outlined for minimum hardware requirements. Right off the bat, regardless of the population of APs you decide to deploy or you intend to deploy over the years, I would go with the high capacity settings. It's 8 more gigs of RAM, twice the amount of CPU cores, and 9 times out of 10 in an established VMware environment, those resources are basically nothing to allocate to a virtual machine. And again, it'll set you up for success, a lot less headaches down the road. Definitely practice good backup practices. There's a built-in tool where it's in the management section of the IQ VA, and it allows you to do a full backup of the VM in the event for disaster recovery or depending on your upgrade strategy. If I could give you any suggestions for upgrades, I would actually probably take a snapshot of your current VM, deploy a new one fresh instead of using the upgrade patch, and leveraging your backup as a restore point, or you can use your backup to restore the newly deployed virtual machine. In the event of an issue, it's just a matter of turning off the new one, turning on the old one, and you're back to right where you started. And it's just minutes of effort. It's very easy. There are some third-party tools that you can use as well. Outside of the built-in backup tool, definitely leverage your VMware snapshots. Those of you with, again, well-established VMware environments, you have probably backup solutions. Veeam is an awesome piece of software that you can use. You could take a full snapshot via Veeam. Say your ESXi host goes down, you can easily restore it to any other VMware host in your environment. Does anyone have any questions so far?
Chris, do you want to show us the help file you were talking about? Do you mind sharing your screen?
If I can find the link. Here we go. Is everyone able to see that?
Yep, we can see your screen.
So here's the specific section from the help file that goes over the deployment. So here's our low capacity for up to 500 devices. The high capacity is up to 5,000. I can't say I've personally seen an IQVA with 5,000 devices, but I have seen one, with 2,000 to 3,000. And again, the more resources you give it, the better it's going to perform. Here, let me put this link. Sam, I'm going to give this link to you if that's all right.
Oh yeah, I'll put it in chat. And can you just demonstrate how to find this section if you're in XIQ, how to get over to this page?
Absolutely. Must have gotten logged out since we first started the meeting. So here's how you get to it from the cloud solution. I don't have an on-prem that I can access at the moment, but there's the question mark in the lower left-hand corner. And depending on what section you are within XIQ or the IQVA, it'll open up the help file to that relevant section. As far as the search criteria I used for coming here, it's just and it's called the quick start. Here we go. And that's the link that I passed to you, Sam.
Yep, I put it in chat for everyone else. All right, great.
Very easy to find. And again, depending on what section within the IQ VA or ExtremeCloud IQ you are, just open up the help file, and again, it'll open up to the relevant section of wherever you are in the actual GUI itself.
Could you show us some of the RF settings you were talking about?
Sure. So we'll look at a default radio profile first. Sorry for jumping around here. So for instance, this the default AC radio profile, some of the settings you're going to see in here. The multi-user MIMO, right off the bat, we do suggest to disable it. It's not a setting personally that I find that suits most environments. If you have a multi-AP environment, or even more popular, a campus environment, a one-to-one deployment, you have one access point per room. Multi-user MIMO and beamforming, I thought this used to be on by default, is on. So we're going to want to turn this off. A few other settings that sound like a good idea in here would be, so for instance, in the 2.4, we have a feature called band steering. And it's a way to try and leverage clients to connect to the 5 gigahertz spectrum as opposed to the 2.4, which again, it seems like a great idea, but in an environment where, for instance, a warehouse where clients are roaming all the time, it does interfere with roaming. So again, warehouse environment, probably not a good idea. If you have a Chromebook environment and you're due for a refresh soon on the equipment, on the Chromebooks that is, and you have a couple 2.4 and a couple 5 gigahertz capable clients, you can use this setting in like a classroom where all clients are going to be stationary, not moving around. because again, it does interfere with roaming. Another thing we like to use in the 5 gigahertz, jumping back, is DFS. As long as there's no radio station nearby, enabling DFS is going to give the APs more channels to choose from overall. And when you multiply that with the channel width, if we're going to do channel bonding, it just minimizes the possibility or reduces the chance of 2 APs being next to each other and on the same channel. Let's see. The high density, usually not something that I would go for right off the bat. My default 5 gigahertz radio profile would be 40 megahertz channels using DFS, disabling the multi-user MIMO, and then that'd be a good starting point. After the actual radio profile is in place, as far as broadcast power goes, I would be very aggressive. I would go lower than I would go higher, 9 times out of 10, just because, like I said, in my opinion, it's much easier to choose it's much easier to troubleshoot a lack of coverage than it is, a whole campus of APs all screaming at each other.
Awesome, thank you. Any quick troubleshooting tips you'd give to somebody who's having some speed issues and they already have the settings you recommend?
Definitely. Without downloading a tech data file and looking through it, we could go in the client section. I don't have a good representation of this because this example, I have no wireless clients on this XIQ. They would all be wired. But if we go into the client section, you're going to see things like what channel the AP, what channel the client is associated to on the AP, and it'll tell you whether you're on 2.4 or 5. You can go down into the client metrics if this was a wireless client. Sorry. Yeah, again, none of these are wireless, so I can't go down into the metrics on them, but it'll tell you the average RSSI. It'll tell you the noise floor, retry counts, application usage. It's a good single pane of glass to use for just getting a quick picture of what's going on within your network.
Awesome, thank you. All right, I'm gonna go into some of the pre-submitted questions just so we have time to talk about those. And you already covered this a little bit, but the first one was, how can I make a scheduled and automated backup of XIQ on-prem configuration and monitoring data? You want to take that one, Chris?
Sure. Can you repeat that, Sam? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. It's how can I make a scheduled and automated backup of XIQ on-prem configuration and monitoring data?
So through the XIQ, I don't believe there's a way to automate it. When you go into the backup section, it'll perform a backup. It does lock you out of the GUI for, we'll say, roughly 30 minutes. And once the backup is through, it'll give you the option to download that file. Definitely keep it in a safe place. And then again, if you're looking to upgrade, rather than using an upgrade patch, you just download the full image of the new IQ VA, deploy it, and you can then use that backup file and restore it to your new instance. And granted, everything goes okay, we turn off the old one and continue using the newly deployed one.
Great, thank you. Next one is, what is the intended or planned release cycle of feature updates, meaning support for new IQ engine versions, not necessarily bug fixes, for IQ VA? Keith, you want to help us out with that one?
Sure. So, ideally, XIQ or IQ VA is going to be typically about 30 days, a full month behind what we have in the public cloud. Roadmaps always adjust and in flux, so that's always in flight, but typically we're looking at 30 days. For some of our customers that recently had the 460s, obviously there was some extended support time there between the two releases. We're usually looking at 1 month.
Perfect. Okay. Another question was, why there's no SAN support for IQ VA? It is a fairly common storage options for many other companies, so they were curious why we aren't using it.
Yeah, great question, and a common question that we get. SAN is very popular and is the default for most customers today. The challenging thing with IQVA is that we're actually taking our entire cloud architecture, which when you have an XIQ instance in public cloud, it's realistically probably around the 40 host range. So we actually have 40 individual host environments that are making up that one XIQ instance. And so that's a lot of, it's a lot of structure, architecture to put into a single instance host that's going to run in VMware. So we have to be really conscious about the common denominators as far as performance goes. And for the type of databases that we're running on the back end and the way that we utilize APIs to call data from those databases, hard disk performance is key for us. We have to have optimal hard disk performance. And IQVA doesn't have tools built into it to monitor a customer's entire SAN environment. So it's very hard for us from a support perspective to guarantee the IOPS that are needed if we don't use dedicated SSD storage. We don't officially support SAN environments for that reason.
Thank you. Next one, will there be an easier way in the future to contribute feature releases other than contacting their SE?
Yeah, so I will probably in the short term or in the foreseeable future, we'll stick with the SE engagement. Of course, we're always looking for feedback. So whether that's going through our community site being the hub and giving some feedback there, reaching out to our technical support team who can get some of the initial process started. At the end of that process, we're still going to have the SE engagement, the direct SE engagement, just so that the SE can work directly with the individual that has the feature request to make sure that we fully understand the scope and what that end user would like to see and create a story and a use case around that is adequate for what we need to then take that internally and get it prioritized and actually get something created. So the direct communication between the field SE and the person with the feature request is pretty vital to the success of getting those in. And so we'll probably stick to that, but we're always open to new ideas.
Great. All right, another one maybe for Chris. What are the best practices in regards to getting Bonjour Gateway up and running with ExtremeCloud IQ? Any configuration tips or gotchas that we should be aware of? And the person submitting the questions primarily using AP 230s and 250s.
Sure thing. Yeah, regardless of the AP, the one thing I would test before integrating Bonjour Gateway is whatever network the device you're trying to access resides on, get the client on the same network and see if you can access that device without Bonjour Gateway in place on the same VLAN. Once that's polished, deploy Bonjour Gateway as normal. There's an option by default to scan all VLANs for services, which we kind of frown upon. It creates a situation where potentially a lot of multicast. Any service that the AP picks up across any VLAN that's trunked on the port that's hosting that AP will be advertised. And 9 times out of 10, not all those services need to be advertised. So yeah, just keep in mind, keep your list of VLANs short. Have a goal for what resources you need to access and from where. And just stick to those 2 basic rules. It's a great way to set yourself up for success.
And for any of our customers that are Hive Manager Classic customers and have worked with the Bonjour Gateway, realm configuration was something that you used to have to do, and you still can. But in XIQ, we default the realm to an AP's location. So based on the maps that you have underneath your ML Insights, when you place an AP onto a map, that's going to create kind of a default realm for that device to help break up some of the multicast storm that Chris was mentioning.
Perfect, thanks. We also have some guides out there on Bonjour setup and troubleshooting. So if you run into issues, you can check those guides out and see if they have any steps that can help you. All right, that's the end of our pre-submitted questions. There was one other one that was submitted about IDE instead of SCSI. I'm gonna have to follow up on that one, so we're not gonna cover that today, but I will have that answer out for everybody on the FAQs when we post the results of this session. So I'm going to open up the floor if anybody has any live questions they want to put into chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question. I will just say we obviously don't have all the answers in the world, but we're going to do our best. And if we can't answer on this call, we're definitely going to follow up with you later and get you your answer. So if anybody has any questions, I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes and let you ask. Or if not, I have some questions of my own that I think will help a general audience. Okay. I'll let you guys think about that for a while. My first general question would be mostly for Chris, but also Keith, if you want to jump in here. Any misunderstood settings that end up causing more problems than helping? Chris already covered a few for RF interference, but if you have any other common settings you find people using without quite understanding the circumstances that you would maybe recommend looking into further.
Sure. I think a big one would be high density. Um, or I don't want to say the explanation, but our take on high density is 3 or more APs in a room or in whatever area that have no walls or sources of attenuation between them. So, for instance, like a cafeteria or a gymnasium, an auditorium, stuff like that. That would be a good use case scenario for load balancing. Doing it in, again, going back to a school with a one-to-one deployment, if you have, 2 classrooms next to each other, one AP in each classroom, one classroom has 40 kids and the other one has, 15. It's not really going to be a good use case scenario for that setting. We're going to have, the broadcast power of these APs is going to be low, hopefully. And when we add load balancing into the mix, you're going to have, clients in classroom A attached to the AP in classroom B and vice versa. It's just, it's not an optimal scenario for, for that one setting. That's probably the first and biggest one that comes to mind.
One that I get pretty often is in regards to VLANs and what VLAN 1 actually means. Oftentimes customers will, in regards to like the AP's native traffic or the management traffic, there will be some confusion around that, or even our default user profile that just has a VLAN ID of 1. The important thing to keep in mind with the cloud APs is that they're intelligently tagging traffics or clients' traffic at the edge of the network. So anytime you see a VLAN ID of 1 in XIQ, that doesn't ever represent tagged traffic. That just simply means untagged traffic. And it actually means that we're going to pass that responsibility onto the switch port that AP is connected to. So if you place your users in a user profile or our access policies where the VLAN ID is 1, you're going to be putting them onto the management network for your APs and oftentimes your infrastructure devices, which is a huge security concern. And so just be aware of that. The VLAN 1 in XIQ just simply means untagged in any regard. And so plan your VLANs accordingly.
Great, thank you. All right. What, in your opinion, would be the most useful or interesting part of XIQ? I know we touched on the help guide, and that might be my answer. But Chris, if you have any other parts of XIQ that you think are overlooked but are pretty helpful.
Definitely. One thing that I used to use in Hive Manager Classic that I just recently started leveraging for myself in ExtremeCloud IQ and IQ VA are the various filters available. When you have a large population of APs across several campuses, it makes kind of makes no sense to look at every single AP when you're troubleshooting an issue. So definitely use the filters on the left-hand side. Kind of going back to what Keith said earlier about location. I mean, now and moving forward more so than ever, I think location is a very important thing that you should define for every one of your APs. There are a lot of dependencies that rely on it, like the Bonjour realms, radio profiles that you need to deploy wherever you need to deploy them. For instance, if you have 2 adjacent buildings and not every single SSID in your network policy needs to exist at both buildings, that's another thing we can use a location based for. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind.
I think for me, 2 things that really changed the way I work inside of XIQ would be the colorization on a lot of our statistics. So whether you're a wireless guy like Chris and I are, and you understand the raw values, or you're someone that's maybe like a CIO level where you're just looking for that dashboard, our ML Insights do a great job of providing those. But I think what a lot of people overlook is that regardless of your knowledge level or how much of the statistics you actually understand, we colorize so much of those statistics so that you can just simply look at it and tell by the color whether it's good, bad, or we're in deep trouble, right? And so I think to pay attention to the colorization and know that, like, from a client 360 perspective, those are actually customizable. So you can go in and choose what your SNR values are or your RSSI values are, which I oftentimes will use depending on the problem that I'm troubleshooting. If I'm supporting a voice device, Well, obviously I need to have a stronger signal strength to maintain voice quality. And so I want my analytics or my comparative, my behavioral analysis that I'm looking at to, to be based off of that stronger RSSI value. So I'll oftentimes edit those values just temporarily. We have a reset to default button, so you're able to get back to that. So the colorization, the other thing that I use a lot is the SSH proxy. Chris and I, we both work remote, and as much great data as we have at XIQ, oftentimes we really need to get into the device, whether that be to look at logs or, or just even a little bit quicker response in some of the data that we're seeing. And so being able to leverage our SSH proxy to have a true SSH session, meaning that I get a randomized port and a randomized public IP address. So not only do I have full CLI access, but I get to use whatever terminal software I'm most comfortable with, whether that's secure CRT or PuTTY or terminal on my Mac. So I can work more comfortably, and I've got full access to that session to continue to troubleshoot.
Awesome, thank you. All right, still no questions in chat. So what are some of the most useful data points or data sets for technicians generally? So Chris, anything that you'd like to see on more cases that really aren't being submitted?
Definitely. Nine times out of 10, tech data is one of the most valuable, at least one of the most initial valuable pieces of data that we could look through. I mean, for any issue, whether it be client performance, client connectivity, even an AP getting knocked offline. If you go in XIQ and you see a couple APs that are red, you can go to a working AP or an AP that's online, grab a piece of tech data. If you know where to look, you can tell if that AP has at least a layer 2 connectivity to the network. Sure, it might not have an IP address, which is why it's showing as red offline in IQ, ExtremeCloud IQ or IQ VA, but you can get a perspective of what's going on with that device potentially from another device's piece of tech data download.
Awesome. Anything other than tech data, client monitors maybe?
Client monitors are good. It's getting better and better every day, especially when trying to troubleshoot roaming issues. That could be one of the more difficult things to troubleshoot, just because we have to rely on as live of data as absolutely possible. So if there's any latency or delay between the AP and XIQ, that could bring up some challenges there. But yeah, definitely the client monitor is definitely useful.
And I think oftentimes customers don't utilize some of the utilities that we have built in. So like just simply running a VLAN probe to make sure that the VLAN is available. Is my switch port configured correctly? Am I getting an IP address back at all? And if so, what subnet is it from? Same thing with like the radius authentication test, or even the device diagnostics. So leveraging some of those tools that we have built in. Again, if you're not that comfortable with the CLI, this is a great way to still get some of that visibility, whether for yourself or for your support rep. And along with the tech data log, we live and die by that, especially our GTAC team. One of the things I'm most excited about, though, is that tech data log is only so large, and it's based off since the last reboot of the access point. So as we continue to develop our management platforms with the introduction of XIQ Site Engine, where now you've got an on-prem appliance that you can run, not only for like third-party management or some of our legacy hardware and software support, but now we have a centralized syslog and SNMP server as well for that more long-term storage. And for someone that still has to manage and troubleshoot networks on a daily basis, long-term syslog is so helpful for everything that I do from a troubleshooting perspective. So now the great part is that every customer that's going to have an XIQ pilot subscription license, in the cloud with us, will have the ability to run an instance of XIQ Site Engine on-prem with no additional cost, and not only get the third-party support and the free additional analytics on top of the layer 7 visibility that we have at XIQ, but now we get some additional centralized logging that helps everybody. So,
yeah, that's great. It's good to know. All right. Chris, if I could bug you to share your screen again, would you mind walking us through some of the newer ppsk options? I know there's the basic user group and users setup, but then we've got features like cloud config group and AP-based or key-based linking.
Definitely. I don't have any examples of it right now. I'd have to build a network policy. I have anything ppsk in here? I don't have a working example of a ppsk network. Keith, would you have anything by chance?
Yeah, I think I do. Let me share my screen. Share my screen and make sure I can find the right screen. So if you're not familiar with ppsk, we're talking about private pre-shared key. It's just a WPA2 authentication. But instead of it being a static key where everyone has the same password, we actually create a dynamic key so that each individual user, each individual device or group of users, you can start to introduce some micro-segmentation into your network. And that piece is very simple to set up and configure. Once you're inside of your network policy and you've created a new SSID, you're able to simply choose a private pre-shared key. And the private pre-shared key, what we use is what we call a user group. And so the user group defines a couple things: the validity and the duration of the key. So we can house that database locally on every access point, and each one of those can have roughly 10,000 keys on a user group. We can also leverage our cloud and store that database in the cloud, which we encrypt with RADSec. So we've got secure communication to the cloud, and then we proxy those requests through a local access point on-prem. So you can choose a combination of how the password is going to be created, as well as how long the key is going to be good for, during for a period of time between certain dates. And you've got some nice functionality built in here, along with email and SMS delivery. So we've had that for a long time, just basic ppsk. One of the things that we've most recently added to that is private client groups. So additional micro-segmentation. What private client groups allow you to do is what private client groups allows you to do is I've got a key that is separate from Chris's. So when we authenticate from an administration standpoint, you can now see what I'm doing with the 2 or 3 devices that I have connected. And we do have control pieces in place so you can restrict how many times that key is used. But you can also see what Chris is doing with his key and his device is separate as well. Now, Chris and I can still see each other's devices when we start talking about things like that Bonjour traffic or multicast traffic on the network. And so private client groups gives us the way to create micro-segmentation for each individual user or group of users. So oftentimes we'll use this in like dorm environments in K through 12 or in healthcare, like senior care facilities, where we want to have some additional control or security around those users. And so what we're able to do is take that key, and now any devices that I authenticate to the network with my private pre-shared key, I'm the only one that can see that multicast traffic. So I'm on the same VLAN, I'm connected to the same SSID as everybody else, but I've got my own little protection cell around me of just my devices. And we do have a shared key. So when you start thinking about residential or healthcare, any of those types of scenarios where there might be visitors or people coming over, I can still keep my personal key private to me, but have a shared key that I can share with visitors so that they can connect to my network and see, my Apple TV or my Chromecast, or get access to my printer that I have as well while they're there. So we've got Mike Reben on with us. Sam will share a link. Mike has created an awesome guide around ppsk configuration scenarios to include the private client groups. So although it's pretty simple, there's a lot of checkboxes and things you can choose from. Mike has done a good job of documenting that and giving you some scenarios and configuration along with it. So we'll make sure to get that link out to the group as well. Any additional questions on that?
Doesn't look like it, but thank you for showing us. That's really cool. And I'll definitely share that link out with everybody.
We got a quiet group today. No questions.
Yeah, I guess we do. I guess everybody just understands XIQ natively. Nobody has any questions. All right, well, if nobody has any questions, I'm gonna wrap it up there and give you 20 minutes back in your day. I really appreciate everybody joining us, and for those of you that did submit questions, I hope we answered adequately, and if not, do let me know and I will definitely follow up. If you think of any other questions, feel free to post them on the community anytime. We're happy to help you there. And thanks for joining. I hope you guys have a great day.